I'd like to call this meeting of the New Shoreham Town Council together. Today's Wednesday, March 29th, 2023. It is 7:03 p.m. We have a couple of things to work on, and then we will open our public hearing, first public hearing on the 2024 budget. So why don't I kick it to Mary Ann and Amy for item number one to discuss and act on allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funds, ARPA.
So what I'm going to do is have Amy give the council, especially for the newer members, a brief update and background of the APRA funds, the funding we received. And then we'll go into possible opportunities as to how we think we can fund that money and timelines and things along that line. We do have a couple more years before we have to spend the money. It has to be committed by a certain time
Sure.
and then
Yep.
spend. And I'll stop at that and let Amy get into those details.
Wonderful. Hello, Amy.
Hi.
It's good to see you.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Sort of my job, but I'm happy to be here. So,
Welcome nonetheless.
and to come back to a topic that's probably been sitting on the shelf maybe a little bit longer than we had intended. We did an introduction to American Rescue Plan or ARPA funds back in November of 2021 when the funds were really first released and committed to the town. And we haven't talked too much about how they can be used since then. So to go back to the beginning, the town received the whopping sum of $302,198. So that's one reason we haven't been sort of actively engaged in that discussion. The next lowest funded community in Rhode Island received over $1 million. That would be Little Compton. And so, you know, while it's significant and we can do some great things with it, it's almost not quite big enough to take on a whole new initiative.
It's not transformational.
It's not quite transformational, but it could be.
Could be.
Could start something.
Yes.
So the real deadlines are starting to creep up on us. The funds need to be obligated by December 31st, 2024 and spent before December 31st, 2026. We can obligate them and spend them at any time, but they must be expended by those dates. Otherwise, we have to return them. We do have them.
So just question. So I'm assuming it was formulaic, and did we fall low like we do with state stuff? and
Entirely
just-
population driven.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I actually would say, I think it was entirely population driven.
It was like a per capita.
Yeah.
But there was no lowest threshold.
Yeah, I don't believe there was a
Right.
bottom floor to it.
If I could just interrupt for a sec, it was particularly galling because normally Little Compton and New Shoreham are at the bottom of the list, pretty close, in the past at least, pretty close to each other. So it wasn't just that we only got 300,000. It was that new.
And Little Compton doesn't have 4 times in them.
I think let's blame Amy.
Mary Ann. It started.
In terms of acceptable uses, while the appropriate deployment of those funds is pretty broad, at the end of the day, there are some federal guidelines that we need to adhere to. In most cases, we qualify for these dollars under the lost revenue sections of the federal laws. So again, that gives us a lot more flexibility to do things that are within our general government services. So things that we typically do on a day-to-day basis. They did emphasize some particular areas of special spending. They identified sewer, water, broadband, economic development, things that were COVID related, but most of our expenditures can fall within those general government services. So again, things that we typically do, you want to benefit a broad base of your community. That's certainly part of the intent of the law. And the first reporting period will of course report no activity is at April 30th of this year. So we do start that federal reporting process. And it's really time for us to talk about how we're going to handle these funds.
Are there any questions? I have a suggestion I would like to ask you to look at. Is that okay, Mary Ann?
I would like to update the council of a suggestion. I've also spoke to Amy about this earlier today, about a suggestion I have that I think will be beneficial to the community, and it's a small, in my head, small dollars amounts.
Would you like to go? Go ahead.
Okay. So we are very fortunate with myself working with RIPTA that they have applied through the Federal Transit Administration funding for our vans for rural transportation. So it's rural communities. Ourselves, Little Compton, and a couple other rural communities have qualified. So I've been working with RIPTA, and we will be applying through this process for 2 vans. The cost to the town is just 20% of the vehicles. Delivery date we anticipate would be 12 to 14 months. The use of these vans will be for a number of community-based services. Specifically, the Recreation Department will use them. I was on the phone prior to heading to the meeting, and I've also been speaking to Bob Girardi, our superintendent, for the last couple of months. They could use it off-island for transportation for athletic events as well as field trips. I also have a need that we'll see that will be used by the seniors on the island. Therefore, they no longer will have to use taxi cabs at a cost, that they will have access to this van. All those things fall under the umbrella of what these vans can be used for based on my conversations with RIPTA. Total cost of the vans, they're much more expensive than I had really anticipated. The vans that we're getting will cost, we'll have final numbers sometime next week, about $250,000, which means we have a 20% match, which means we'll get $250,000 worth of vehicles for $50,000. I've had some preliminary discussion with Bob Girardi, and he said he'll be more than happy to approach the school committee to see if they'll be open to provide some kind of funding for the cost of these vehicles. So I think this would be one way we can spend some of this ARPA money for the community, which includes a broad cross-section of the community.
Just to clarify, do you mind?
No,
Clarify
please.
for a second, Mary Ann. I know you said we're applying and all that, but is the indication that we're getting to
So
pretty
what you-
strong?
Yeah, no,
I'm just making sure.
it's a definite.
It's a definite we're going to get 2 vans.
It's a definite. Before the council on Monday night will be the memorandum of understanding that we need to sign, because RIPTA will be the ones purchasing the vans on behalf of the community. So it's fairly much a done deal. We originally were told vans would take 18 to 24 months. Then we were told 12 to 18 months, and the latest delivery time is 12 to 14 months. So we're hoping by midsummer next year, a year from now, or the fall, we'll definitely have both vans on island, which is great.
Great stuff.
So quick
Can I-
question for you. Are they, so if they're transit authority, they're Altoona rated, so do they have Ford engines? I'm just thinking about how, we don't have a service team. So when you look at them, a Ford engine could be under warranty. We could deal with one of the Ford agencies. So do you know, I mean, it's just something to think about.
I don't know the engines in the vehicles. I can
Yeah.
find that out. Whenever we have problems with service with vans and vehicles, we're heading North Island.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is if it's a Ford motor, which it probably is, the advantage is we could be dealing with flood,
Mhm.
Ford for all warranty related issues, which will save the town in the long run.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions about the vans, because I know we talked about this and we agreed to move forward on 2 vans. So you're saying that the cost of the town would be $50,000?
About 50,000.
So,
The final
so
number
what is the 250,000 number?
is the total cost of them. We're only responsible for 20%, which is 50,000.
Okay,
The other 200,000 is part of the grant.
so how big are they? I mean, I
Um,
know these are all questions, by the way, I want to say, these are all questions I should have asked before I voted on, yes, let's get vans.
So
Okay,
the
so
the
how big are
total,
they?
there's, with vans and these type of vehicles, there's limitation with the number of seats before you would have to escalate to the next type of driver license. So both vans will not have more than 15 seats, including the driver. So what we'll do is, one van, we're looking to get 14 passenger and one driver. Another van, we're looking to do less, so that we can drop it down to have it wheelchair access. And the less seats will allow for maybe sports equipment and stuff like that to be transported also.
Okay, so that was my next
And
question.
both vans are handicapped accessible with lifts.
Okay, so both have lifts. That was my next question. That's why they're so expensive. Okay, and my other question would be, you threw out a bunch of uses, but one of your uses has a van on the mainland. So you said recreation, seniors, school. So if we're divvying one of these out to the school to put on the mainland, how are we dividing the other one between seniors and
So let me
recreation?
back up. The one on the mainland will be mainly for recreation and athletics, school, let's say school. We do that now. We keep a van on the mainland. We had two vans up until not too long ago. One
Mhm.
stays here and one's on the mainland. And then the summer, they usually bring it back.
Okay, so I guess what I'm asking is, what department does this fall under?
I would probably most likely have these vans fall under the Recreation and Human Service Department.
Okay, and Human Services incorporates seniors?
Yes.
All right. So then why would we be asking the school for any money?
We don't have to.
Okay, I'm just trying to sort it out, because
We don't have
I
to.
don't want this to become a proprietary issue where the school says, but we put money towards that and we don't want to share it with seniors, or we've got this
The vans,
event that preempts. I know this is getting into fine details,
yeah,
but
but what I
um,
can say is the vans we've had in previous years, we've never had that kind of problem. And I think in previous years, the town has purchased the vans. Right now, as far as our relationship with the school, we have an excellent relationship with the school. And there's a lot of give and take on a lot of different things with the school. So I don't see, and I have not seen any kind of proprietary concerns with the school. They've been absolutely wonderful to work with. I've been in other lives where it isn't like that, and that's not the case here at all.
And I think for now, you're talking about budgeting purposes, you're saying, hey, 50 of this money could be allocated towards that. I think that's what your point was. And then as it gets more operational and we actually figure out when they're arriving and all those details, I think those are good questions, just to make sure.
So we do have to provide the $50,000 at time of order. So that would be happening probably within the next month.
Okay.
And we just received the MOU, which confirmed that that would be.
Do we have the cash necessary to do that? Okay.
Do you know what remains in the state budget? Because I think it was 700,000 for this is 5311, right? The rural transportation. Do you know what it's left in it?
This is
the-
the Federal Transit Administration. I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
familiar with
Not the
that
Rhode
particular
Island,
one you're
okay.
talking about.
This
This
is
is
one in Rhode
federal,
Island.
this isn't state.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mary Ann? So first of all, on this kind of money, I think we all have the same kind of basic philosophical bias, which is you want to use it for things like this is an opportunity to buy 2 new vans, something that doesn't create a new program that therefore creates a hole in the next year's budget, for example. You see particularly a lot of states that fall into that trap. Mary Ann and I and Jess Willie and Bob Girardi have been meeting regularly, as I think I told you guys when we were talking about the school budget. And one of the things that really has stuck with me about one of those conversations is something that Fisher's Island did with their school, where they actually invited in education experts from Yale and basically said, come in and look at our infrastructure, look at our curriculum, look at, sort of take a look and, see what you think we could be. And by all accounts, it was a real success. As you guys may or may not know, Fisher's Island, for example, the model that they chose is they're essentially a magnet school where kids come over from the mainland on a ferry. Those kids pay tuition. It's built a very robust program. And I don't, believe me, I'm not arguing for that model. I'm just saying that they created a community conversation around how do we ensure long-term excellence for our school system. And when I was looking at the agenda and thinking about tonight over this past weekend, it struck me that this is a golden opportunity to me for us to do the same thing here. Apropos of our school system and education generally, and what do we want to be? What can we be? What makes economic sense? What does a modern school look like? How are schools taking advantage of online video learning, distance learning opportunities? There's about 5,000 questions. And I would, if the council thinks this is worthwhile, I would really like us to talk about undertaking that kind of a community conversation around ensuring ongoing excellence in our school, ensuring ongoing excellence in our infrastructure, education infrastructure, and to me that's from pre-K all the way through. Because the likelihood that we're going to get, $150,000 to pay some, really good grad students or PhD candidates or education professors from some of these institutions, just to sort of help the community develop its education priorities and reach a consensus around what the infrastructure ought to look like and what everything ought to look like. To me, those opportunities do not come along very frequently. So I would like to use it as a planning exercise for what I think is at its most essential, one of the most important things we do in this town, which is educate our kids. So anyway, enough rambling from me.
Just, and in your mind, or based on the discussions you've had, is that a 150 hold, 200 hold? Do you have any perspective on that?
I don't have, the number that comes to mind for me is, 125 to 150. But I don't, without having this conversation at the council, maybe one of the one thing I did do is we actually have a high-ranking professor from Yale who lives on the island, and I spent some time with him just to sort of say, would it be crazy if we came up to you and sort of had this conversation? And he was like, whatever we can do. I think if we were talking, Sven, I think you would agree because you weren't in the education business, but you were in the consulting business. If we were talking about retaining, say, a firm, my bet is it would be much more expensive than that. But I don't, in my mind, at least, when I think about this, I don't think of putting something on the shelf that an education planning consulting firm gave to us. I would, when I think about this, I think about the school as a community priority and engaging the community in how we all go about the business of excellence.
I like the idea of early learning center up, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, all the way up
Yeah.
throughout the whole thing, because I think a fresh third-party look that's, not had kids in it, or not had opinions about it, or not
Right.
liked or disliked, just what's tomorrow's calling? Okay, great. I love it. Yeah, yeah.
Does that sound like something we could work on together, Marianne?
Yes.
Yeah. Great, terrific. Thank you.
Are we throwing ideas out since I've heard school and bands? Is that the goal
The
for
money's
now?
already been spent, but thank you.
No, I don't think so. That's why I asked what the number was.
So we are disabusing ourselves of the idea we're gonna find more kids in the school. I've said this before, people say there aren't gonna be more kids in school for 5 years, and if they've been listening to that my whole life. There's still kids in school. I think we're still going to be.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, I haven't talked to you about this, Jess, but I don't know what we can guess around broadband implementation and whether that has an impact on the number of kids in the school, It's, I mean, I'm not looking to you like, what do you think? It's just, heck, I don't know. There's room in my mind for, we get a significant influx, right? But I don't know.
If
We
I could
did-
say, I
We
think
did during COVID.
I think Martha's point is really important when this group is getting together designing, so that I believe next year, and I'm looking at Jess a little bit, there's going to be a class of potentially 0 students, or maybe 2, 3, whatever, very small. And how do you flex to it? So having the rigid idea of you got to have a room for every class, and there's only 2 kids in the class one year and 14 the next year.
Mhm.
Well, what's the system today that you would design? And I don't know what it is, but. Yeah. So, Marianne, the other one that I was noodling on a lot was, and is a little bit of reaction to the current budget, but it's also, I think, in recognition of the meeting coming up on the 3rd, I think, with the new senior or new director. That budget was a little shy this year, at least in the recommended versus the actual, about 20,000 shy. And one of the thoughts I had was, do we think about in this ARPA funds or in funds, do we think about adding that into potentially, I believe there is a little bit of a carve out for the senior advisory or this new director position. And my question is, if we look at in administration, there's sort of this area where maybe we could put some money in, like 20,000 for the director. What? I believe it's line 8,300 on page 9.
But you're talking about the operating budget, Sven.
Yes, it's in administration. And it would be line 8,300, where right now the request was 5,000, the recommended 5,000. And I was thinking that this is basically a human services line that would fall, I believe, under the director kind of thing. At least that's the way I read the budget. And I'm just trying to think about, okay, now the director is coming on board. This gives that person, whoever that may be, a little bit of flex. And I don't know whether that's an idea or not, versus as we get there for community support. And so it's ending up in the same sort of place, but it has a little bit more direction by the director. So it's just a thought as we think about dollars and available funds. And it's really in complement to the new hire and making sure that that person has some funds that they can actually work with for whatever in 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, as they really get deep into it, they're like, well, we really could use this. And so I just want to make sure we empower that person with funds.
I appreciate what you're saying. I really philosophically against putting any kind of money like this into operating. You're digging yourself a hole for next year. I've always been against it.
I have a question. So during COVID, our town employees took a pay freeze, is that something that they, is that something that they recouped? Remember our town employees took a pay freeze, right? So were they made whole on that, or is that something that this money should be used for? I don't know how that ever ended up.
So what happened with that, there's two different unions. I recall one, the clerical union. They took a 0 for the first year of COVID. Let's call it the first year of COVID. And Amy, correct me if I'm wrong with what I'm stating. And what happened was we decided to look at the revenues, and that was in the agreement, to look at the revenues after after the first quarter of the year that they took the 0. We went back, renegotiated with them, and they received pay for 9 months of the 12 months. That's correct.
Increase in pay.
They received an increase for 9
9
months
months,
of the
yep.
12 months.
So the other 3 months, is that something that we could use this money for? I mean, I think that's something we should consider. The other thing that I would love to see is, school committee meetings are not broadcast. So that anybody outside of the meeting can see them. And I think it would be really important to, if the school doesn't have the means in their budget to provide for that equipment, that perhaps we could. I think it's a big budget. It's 30% of our budget. Especially, I really like your creative idea about rethinking things a little bit, but I think it's easier to do if there's more transparency where taxpayers can see what's going on and maybe be inspired to go to the meetings and be a part of the conversation. I know I go to a lot of school committee meetings. They're really interesting. So anyway, I think that might be something. And in that vein, I want to say that this system is wanting. I was not at the last meeting. I spent 4.5 frustrating hours along with 59 other people who apparently were watching on YouTube, trying to follow meetings where I couldn't hear a word that the DEM said, not
Right.
one.
Yep.
And if I did get the audio dangerously close to my ear, then someone on the council would speak, and it was terrifying.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying it was like it was really frustrating. The housing meeting was better. I don't know why it was so frustrating, because there was also no video, so I couldn't see, like, were people talking into microphones and maybe they just weren't turned on. But I think it's a failure that our audio and our video were so substandard all at once, when I doubt there were 60 people in the room, and it was pretty cool that 60 people could watch that online, but not really. So anyway, I think that's something we need to think about.
It has become more of a frustration and a concern for me, and I get an increasing number, as I've expressed to Marianne, an increasing number of complaints, concerns, frankly, assertions about what our obligations are pursuant to the new charter. And it's something that, is in the charter, and we have to get better at it. And if that means that we need new equipment to do it, or different microphones, I know Tom's been pulling his hair out, trying to make the stars align on this, but it just, I mean, honestly, I'm not tired of people reaching you, but I'm tired of answering complaints about it.
Is there anybody else besides the school committee that isn't being broadcast? I just don't know. I mean, if we're going to talk about this, we sure, we
Harbors.
cover everybody.
Yeah, I think it's, zoning, planning, HDC, us, conservation,
But is everybody being
not
broadcast
tourism.
at this point?
Um,
Should they be?
Just,
Those
just-
that are outlined in the charter are doing it.
But I think it's, I think it is working. People are watching it, therefore it, might be good to go beyond
Well,
what's
I said
required by
pe-
the charter.
People pay attention to this, they do watch. And it's not, it's actually pretty broad. It may not be deep, but it's broad. Kristen. No, all right, so we've covered that. Right? Have we? Anybody else, anything on ARPA? I think we've.
Well, can we look into that, not just in terms of the school or in terms of
Yeah.
upgrading, but broadly, if we're going to do it, let's do it right across the board.
I agree with that, Martha. Yes,
I hate it too, but
yeah.
You'll
I-
live
I-
with it.
I know, it's, and I hate, the thing that's frustrating is I hate it more every week because people are writing to me complaining about it and they're
they're
right.
going to be because you just turned and looked at
Exactly,
me.
like just because I just.
And,
heard
and I
it.
hate
Yeah.
the lack of spontaneity that
Yes,
this has created.
yes. Number 2, capital tax. This is where we segue into this year's budget.
So you ready? Okay. So as we begin the operating budget discussion and what one department said when she sat down at the table and said that the town manager said that everything we requested in our operating budget, I received my budget, and I was surprised. We actually did receive everything that we requested. Unfortunately, I cannot say that about the capital budget. And also the fact that the capital budget is funded this year's $370,000 is really significantly lower than I have as a goal in my head for this town and their capital budget. I think it should be, yes.
Can I just ask you one quick thing? Would you just explain for people what the capital tax section of the budget is, Mary Ann?
So the capital tax section of the budget is that portion of the budget that is a capital item, which is defined in our ordinance at $25,000 or higher, that is paid with taxpayers' dollars. Usually the capital items are short-term items that don't require a bond issue and things of that nature. So they're really small items. There are some items in here that even though questioned are a little high that would be capital item because they're more of a maintenance instead of a renovation or major repair or upgrade. So I would like to see this capital budget easily double than what it is. $500,000, I think, is the lowest it should be, and we should ramp it up to almost $750,000. At that level, it will give us the opportunity to replace vehicle on a schedule to get away from the leasing. We have been leasing in recent years, and we've been fortunate. The interest rates have been extremely low. But now the leasing interest rates have gone up, and the cost of leasing has also gone up. And that's not a way we would like to spend our money on a long-term basis. Also, Tom Rism spent some time coming up with a painting, what would take to paint all the town buildings. That is not budgeted this year. So those are some of the things that we are working on from a long-term basis that we hope to be able to stop budgeting in our capital budget. And I think because of the strides we made in our operating budget in the last 2 to 3 years, I think we can get there next year. I'm optimistic, but like everything else, we'll see what happens. So in this year's capital budget, like I said, it's a small budget. It's $370,000, and it does include a handful of things and a number of other items that we didn't budget.
Marion, just for everybody, it's page 23 of 24 of the budget. I'm just letting everybody know.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
It's page 23, right?
That's correct.
I'm
page
just for
23,
everybody
24.
following.
So the first item that we are budgeting is for the harbors. It's a trailer for the truck. The one they have is no longer working, so we are getting that. Also for the harbors, it's equipment for the harbors boat, $40,000. The Coast Guard, we have $100,000. That is 75,000 for the motor pools, 25,000 for the dock. If you look, we also budget 150,000 the year before in capital, and I'm sorry, in capital for the Coast Guard. And that year was 75,000 for the Coast Guard, the motor pool, and 75,000 for the boat. I'm sorry, for the dock. The 75,000 and the 25,000 that we have for the 2 years combined of 100,000 will get the repairs we need for that dock. It is not a new dock. A new dock would be significantly more. It's more of a dock that the repairs need to be done for a number of safety reasons. The amount that in the Coast Guard, which now comes up to about 100, that comes up to 150,000, is to renovate the motor pool for seasonal workforce, our year-round seasonal reserve police officers, so that they would have a place to stay. The previous chief did have a plan for that. Interim Chief Shabbat came in and he suggested a different plan. So now with Chief Lynch here, we're going to leave it to him.
We'll have a third plan.
Yeah. How, so that's why, so we didn't
Good
get, so we did not get anything done this year to the Coast Guard facility because we were waiting for the chief to come on board because of the bulk of the work that will be done and it'll be for his staff. Health Service did request $125,000 for a generator that was not budgeted this year. The current generator, according to Tom, is still in working conditions. We would recommend that the generator become part of the major renovations that are going on at the medical center. And also with the equipment and the upgrades of the HVAC and other things going on, I think it would be best to wait to those plans are finalized and the generator can complement the equipment that they would be needing for that facility. Going on, we have radio and communications. This is the stuff that we started a year ago with the fire department. It's the repeaters. We are now between what they requested and what we budgeted last year. We can make some significant steps in there. We have not begun much of that process. We need to meet and discuss what the plan is now that the Wi-Fi project is pretty well much behind us from a construction point of view. So now that we can start focus on that as to what we will need. And keep in mind that what we do with the fire department, the same communication piece will be applicable to other things we'll be doing in public safety as relates to laptops and devices that we'll be putting into the police vehicles, also the body cameras for the police department. So what's happening, there's enough overlaps that we're finally starting to address some of these budgetary items we've been talking about for the last couple of years. And with a comprehensive plan that will meet the interest of the whole community from a public safety point of view. Recreation, although we have that great news where we have $250,000 worth of equipment coming to us to the tune of $50,000 that we have to pay for. Unfortunately, because of the timing of the delivery of those vehicles, the vans we have now is really limping along. We're down to one van. We did have two. We're down to one van. At this point, that van, we don't feel comfortable with that van being used off island for the students like they have in the past. We're comfortable with what it's doing on the island, and maybe we'll be able to use it for a week or two for the start of the summer camps. So we did go out to bid this year to look for the purchase of a van, even to get a used one. The 35 wasn't enough, so we budgeted another 30 for 65,000. And based on what I'm seeing of the cost of the new van that we would be getting with the grants, it makes sense that $35,000 was not even going to touch what it would cost for a new van, I'm sorry, a used van. Technology, the $33,000, this is the one strictly related, mostly related to the police department that we said we do have some stuff that we've purchased. The body cams, I'll have, if you need to have Chief Lynch speak more to that. There is a grant out there that is statewide, and before the chief came on board, I did work with the gentleman at the state to reserve some funding for us so that we'll have funding for the body cams. And like I said, we do have the laptops to be put in in the police cars. So we got some stuff in place. It's a matter of just continuing with that project as we move along. Next is the library HVAC of $30,000. That's the continuation of the necessary repairs to the HVAC at that library. You'll see, if you look in the long-term capital, we're using 30,000. We'll be looking to budget $30,000 each year for a few years going forward. Northlight, we did budget $52,000 last year. They came forward requesting another $250,000. What we spoke to them about is what do they need to branch off and get a big chunk of the project done, and they said the 50,000, so they'll have $102,000 to begin some of the renovation. And the facilities director has taken over spearheading and taken on the project
Thank you.
of the Northlight, and starting to work with Robbie Gilkin to get that moving along. And like I said, that's a total of $370,000 for this capital budget. It's not a lot of money. And it's not where I would like to be with this capital.
Just to aside, Marianne or Tom, you can talk to it, but on the North Light, I heard you say, ooh, you know, the North Light has been limping along for a long time, and there's some, well, I'll let, you know, at some point Tom can talk about it, but it worries me that we're continuing to not really fund this in a big way. And so as long as we can really talk about that as budgets going forward and what's really needed, because, you know, 50,000 can be bettered away pretty quickly in a building that needs 400 or whatever the real number is. And I just don't, it would be a disaster for all of us if that ever happened, if that building wasn't supported the way it needs to be.
Yeah, I've got a question about that, only because I'm familiar with how it was supported in the past. There was a lot of, particularly T21 money that went into that structure at like I think 475 one year. And has that money dried up? I just don't know. I just wasn't involved for years. Is that still out there? Is there still preservation money? There are only, I think, 6 of those lighthouses anywhere, like that particular design. And it's got to have, I mean, we know how popular it is. We know it has huge historic value. And I feel like everybody's just been trying to keep it together with local resources, and
Yeah,
it's worth more than that.
and largely local labor with
Well,
Rob.
that's what I said. When I,
Yeah,
res-
yeah,
when I said resources, that was
I know.
really what I
Yeah,
meant.
Yeah.
I've mentioned it only because I don't want it to fall off the radar, and every year it sort of falls off a little bit.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And then- I know you are.
This, I just don't know the answer to the question about the money and what's available anymore. And I don't have any, we've lost our contacts, but everybody we knew at Historic Preservation retired.
I just want to take a second to talk about body cameras because I think it's important the chief hear this. You would have, if you were watching our budget meetings last year, then there really is more wrong with you than but last year we moved, the council spent a lot of time and energy and effort moving money to start that program and developing consensus around that. And it was, I'm had hoped that we would be farther along on that project, and I don't think that you know, I'm not saying that anybody did anything wrong, but I just, when I saw zeros in here, I have to say I was frustrated when I first read it. And still frustrated, you know, not frustrated with anybody, but frustrated with sort of having put in that effort and started the investment. And I know it's a multi-layered investment because there's ongoing expense associated with it. I think it's a really important thing to have. I happen to think that I think body cameras are actually largely prove out how challenging the job is of being a police officer. So it's from a place of support, and I just really wanted to raise it so that you know that from our perspective, it's a really important thing. Thank you.
Where are we on funding that hasn't been expended and equipment that hasn't been deployed yet? Or are the resources over there that are still looking to be expended?
That's a question I asked earlier too.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
get it though.
I don't really even need the numbers to say in general. Are you asking first about the police and then more broadly, or? Yeah, so
Specifically the
most-
police.
Yeah, when you look at the capital items that were budgeted for police for fiscal year 23, those essentially have not been expended, given the transitions that have been going on, which means one of the actions we'll ask the council to take in June, if those programs haven't gotten off the ground yet, would be to reserve those funds to add to what we're budgeting in 24.
Yeah.
I would also add that particularly in the technology line for police support, which needs to underpin all of these other programs, you'll see a request for 33,000 that has a zero against it. That's because we are holding the current year 33,000, and there's additional funding from prior years that we're also holding for technology related to the police department. So we feel like there's enough resources to get those programs going in the dollars that we've already set aside. Sure.
And the good news
Thank
is
you,
that
Amy.
Chief has implemented body cams in Wilton. So we have someone who has the experience. to
Wonderful.
do it, and
That's great.
That's the great news about all this.
So he's in charge and it's up to him to make it happen in like
Exactly.
in 2 weeks.
No pressure.
I know that it was not a failure in inclination. It's not, you know, but it just, you know, when you work hard on something like that, you just want to make sure it's, you know, not.
And it's one of the
not
first things
forgotten.
we talked about
Yeah.
with them. I said, so what do you know about body cameras?
Yes.
You know,
right.
and based on the fact he's implemented it and they've used them and in Wilton and stuff like that, it's good news.
They under the question, the capital tax portion. Molly, Neil?
I
Sorry.
would love, and you know, I guess I could do it, or maybe Mary Ann with League and Cities and Towns. I would love to know the 39 towns, what percent on average over the last
question.
5 years they spend on capital and tax as a percent of budget or as a percent of size, or we don't need it now. I'm just sort of like, hey, what on average should we be at 600,000? I'm making that number up totally. Where should we be just to sort of be average? Forget investing or, you know, so at some point I would love just to have that as a reference point because we can all start, that would be very helpful.
Right.
Well, yeah, so we'll go off and get the number, but I'm going to preempt that by saying, one, every community is different, but also I think we know what those numbers are and we know what our assets are and where we're not replacing them or moving them ahead as far as or as quickly as we need to.
So I'm going to actually counter that and say, I don't think we do. So
Okay.
depending on how you want to define capital, we haven't been painting our buildings the way we should be painting them. And if we had, we wouldn't, right? Or we wouldn't have the discussion on North Light. I mean, so I get it. I think we do know the numbers by heart, but I'd love that number.
Any other questions on capital tax? Are we going to do the capital budget tonight, or are we doing that?
So do you want to go over the 6-year capital too? And
I,
just,
I would, here's, I, mean, I would like to go through the capital plan. However, I want people who want to speak about the budget, I want to give them an opportunity. So either, after that or, in a follow-up, because I do think, in some ways, the frustration of the budget, whether it's capital tax or any other, you're sort of massaging over at most tens of thousands of dollars, but the thing that really embodies sort of the forward-looking intentions, it's this long-term capital plan, and I want to make sure that we give it its due. So with that, why don't we begin the public hearing on the budget? Kristen, do you want to come up? Yes.
Let's see.
Are you going to share good news with us?
I'm Kristen Bauman. I'm the director of the Island Free Library and my green light is on.
Great.
I hope I didn't sound pesky. I had a couple of questions about exactly where you were at. And so I didn't know if it was a
So you didn't-
conversation at that point or not. What-
You weren't being pesky,
Okay.
and I was interrupting you as you went up saying, are you going to share positive information, exciting information with us?
On Tuesday, the Island Free Library was listed as a finalist for the National Medal for Library and Museum Service. It's the highest honor in the country. Yeah. It's a huge deal. Thank you. Thank you. We are now a group of 15 libraries and 15 museums from across the country, and 3 to 5 of those 15 in each category will win. So we consider this a very big win, and thank you for asking. I have a terrific staff. And I have to be short about that or I'll cry. So yeah, I have a really terrific staff.
It is
Before I start to
really
cry.
wonderful.
Okay, so, and you know what was cool about that today? I got an email from Senator Whitehouse. He's like, how can I help you win? I'm like, whoa, let's bring him out. 8300 line. Yeah, 8300 line. What is that? 5,000 Human Services. That was my question from a few nights ago, and then I'm not sure I still understand it. If you don't mind, Amy.
Page
Dueling
8 or
microphones. I
page 8
figured
or
it out.
9,
This is
page
where I'm
9.
supposed to stand.
Yes, I do like the dueling microphones.
It was what was Sven was
Thank you.
saying, and do we lump it? And I don't know about lumping it because I don't know what it is.
Sure. So we're on page 9 in administration, and there's line number 8300 Human Services funded at $5,000, which is the same level it's at in fiscal year 23. And that's sort of a general expense line, the only one that exists in the budget in support of the Coordinator of Human Services, which is a wage line. So there is no other place for that growing department to buy paper or pens or other supplies, pay
Yep.
dues.
Yep.
I would expect that to grow and solidify
When a director's on there.
between 24 and 25,
Got it.
years 24, 25.
And so because Human Services is in administration, it lives there too, for now.
Yes.
Right.
Great. Thank you. And then I love talking about Fisher's Island. The island to island exchange was really fascinating when we did that. And I'm so grateful that you're talking about creative solutions and education. I appreciate that. Laurel, I'd be happy to show you how to do closed captioning on the Zoom so people could at least read. Marianne, if you want to ask the lawyer, or if the lawyer's listening, I think that that's a legal maneuver. It's really easy. Then people just read what you're saying and it's easy. I could do it with whoever has the settings for that machine. Just a suggestion to
Really good idea.
Molly, thank you for asking about the town employees. They negotiated a deal that left them out of those 3 months. Kind of you to think of them. I think my colleagues were saying it's your money, you can do what you want, but that was a negotiated end to that situation. And I put in a request for capital painting for the Island Free Library. And I just wanted, because it's not shown as requested, so I think it got moved into this painting schedule that Tom works on. And so I just wanted to clarify that and just have it be a note for you that there was a request there. The building got a lot of construction done. Painting would be great next year. And if it doesn't come this year in that capital, and I respect the long-term plan, and I've seen it working in action. I work in a building that's getting a tremendous amount of work done, and we appreciate that. But I just want you to know there is a piece there that's missing for us in this budget. Thank you.
It's not in the long-term capital. It's intended to be rolled into that larger facilities painting program. So when it's able to be executed on as part of that program, it'll come out of maintenance facilities, line 7400 under Public Works. So it's not,
Long-term capital plan, there's $30,000 of interior work.
yes.
Is that different?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That'll be, depending on which year you're looking at, it's probably phase 2 and phase 3 of the HVAC program.
It's every year at 30,000, 24 to 29.
Yeah, there are 5 air handler units
So
that are
just-
being replaced on a system.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't say, there might. A monster of one just went in.
Terrific. Hello, Tom, come up. Good to see you.
So Tom Workup from the Block Island Medical Center. Kind of a question and maybe a concern. Did I hear, I wanted to make sure I understood you about the generator. It seemed like in the wording was that it should be pushed off onto the capital campaign? Or did I just misunderstand that?
So what we're thinking, it could be part of the renovation of that building that's going on. And I think it'll be easier to do it at that point, so it complements what you're putting in there as relates to equipment and things like that. So we, as Tom helped me out with what I'm supposed to say here, so that it complements the voltage we need, we would know based on what we're putting into the building and things like
Absolutely.
that.
No, it makes good sense. But it as a capital expense to the medical center, because right now it's 100% privately funded, or that's a town obligation in fiscal year 25. I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not it was previously talked about as a capital expenditure from the town for what is often said as a town building.
Mhm.
But I think the way I heard it was you could interpret it that we, the town, think it should be part of the capital campaign that's private money.
I think it should be explored to be part of the campaign of the medical center. I think that's also has been talked about a little bit too.
Okay. Who did that conversation been talked about with
Was
whom?
talked probably a couple of years ago when we were doing some of the construction and talking of the plan of the construction.
Okay, so we'll have to add that onto the private monies. One of the other concerns, and maybe Tom could speak to it, and Chris, or Charlie Weber, that I don't have any problem with the generator being at the end of its useful life. As long as it works, it works. I just want to understand it, at least in the last 3 years that I've been involved in it, it always is being mentioned as at the end of its useful life. If it doesn't work, the Department of Health won't allow us to open. And I think you'll put us in a terrific bioethical and philosophical conundrum because we can't treat anybody. And I think we're not going to be treating people in the ambulances, or whether or not the medical centers board would even allow that to happen. So I'd love to understand the reaction time if something isn't working to get it working.
So internally, we discussed that a little bit. And what we probably do is like what we did with the school, because the school had a problem with their generator. We
Yep.
we had to shut down, it wasn't working at all. And what we ended up doing was they couldn't even open school because they're required to have the generator because of the
Similar.
sprinklers and the pumps,
Right,
and I
right.
won't get into that detail. And what we did, we reached out to FEMA right away, and our generator was here. So we talked about we would end up doing the exact same thing in this situation.
And how,
Knowing-
how fast did that generator get to the island? So think of the medical center not open for 5 days, and what are you gonna do with every single rescue for 5 days? Yeah, I think we're gonna have to have a proactive conversation about it, because it's not an easy fix. Yeah. Yeah, and I think he was one of them that said we're at the end of its useful life. So I'm just hoping so I'm a little disappointed that it went from a potential town allocation in some fiscal year, this year or next year, to it's another, right now, there's no funding from the town for this building, and that it would be under the private donations to now raise another 125,000 for a generator for a building that is often said is the town's building. So I'm just trying to figure out what is the town's response plan when and if it doesn't work and the power goes out, we'll be in a real pickle that I think we'll sit here and say, boy, we should have thought about this beforehand. So anything that would be proactive, and I think Charlie could speak to it. I think they've already done the specs on what generator would be there. It's a good idea to make it complementary, but I don't think it's so unique that it wouldn't be something that's already been spec. I think we already have it had spec'd out and say, this is the generator that would be complementary to this building, but certainly Charlie to speak to it, or Tom, just think of that scenario that really scares us, because I think we'll be in a situation that either have to, a real bioethical conundrum.
Can I ask a question? It took I didn't understand this at the time, but this is not my wheelhouse. It took 5 days to get a generator here? Is that what I'm hearing? The power company took less than 24 hours when they had the fire. I mean, are there other ways of doing this?
I'm Charlie Weber.
Hello,
I'm
Charlie.
the owner's project manager for what the upcoming medical center renovations. When the power company had a fire and it went down, they didn't ask FEMA for a generator. They called up Milton Cat and said, we need it right now. And they came out. And I think what Dr. Workup is saying is that the town should possibly have a plan in place to do the same thing. We can have one that, the rate of Massachusetts takes 2 hours to get to the boat. You can have it that fast.
Yeah, I remember the day.
Right.
That's why I asked the
remember
question.
day too. And I think what he's saying is that he doesn't think the onus should be on the medical center to develop that plan, that he thinks the onus should be on the town. It's the town's building. Without a generator, we're shut down.
I don't think we're saying that that happened. We would ask the medical center to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think he's just saying that
Yeah.
we need
I
to
didn't
develop
hear
a
him
plan
say that.
for it. It's been pushed off a couple times now off the
Yeah.
capital budget. And, now you're asking us to put it, to go have a bake sale for it. And, it's
This-
a pretty important piece of the equipment. And the generator, BER, who did the engineering study for the medical center, for the addition, has listed what needs to be for a generator, for the capacity, what it needs. And it's all there, it just, we just need to get it paid for, basically.
If I'm hearing this, if what I think I'm hearing, this is a significant change that is new to me tonight. This had always, in my two budgets, now third budget, this had always been contemplated as something that the town was going to do.
Correct.
Not as something, I can tell you, that the capital campaign was contemplating. So this is something that we got to pay attention to, whether there's two questions here. There's the immediate, what happens if this generator craps out, and we have to treat people. And then there's the what appears to be a different policy position that the town would be adopting apropos of this generator.
Thank you.
Not to slam you guys with people from the medical center, but I'm Allison.
Hello, Allison.
So beyond like needing to talk about the plan, we actually need that emergency action plan in writing. And that's part of the rural health designation.
Okay.
So we will need to have a plan for what is going to happen if the generator goes down, now that we have it kind of on record that it is at the end of its useful life. So I look forward to developing that with you guys.
Great, terrific, thank you. Hi, Kristen.
You know, so this is a budget hearing. So may I ask, would that be something that contingency could pay for? Is that how contingency works? I know I've worked with Amy Land for many years and it's always excellent work from Amy. And so what, is that how contingency could work? I mean, I imagine it's a council decision. Could it be a 24-hour thing if contingency works like that? Thank you.
So yes and no. That's where, in this particular scenario, depending on the terms of that temporary or replacement generator, it may exceed our current contingency, in which case we do have a funding gap that needs to be reconciled. But similar to the school scenario, where we actually did use, the council authorized using our contingency to support that exercise, it's the appropriate place, whether there's enough capacity based on the solution at the time is the question. It's also why we carry things like a certain level of unreserved fund balance to
Right.
accommodate these things that come up as emergencies.
Right. Anybody else at the public hearing? David?
So back to the police department.
Yes.
Could you talk into the microphone, sir?
I'd be delighted to.
Thank you.
I have two questions I'd like to ask, but David Lewis, Coonamus Road for the record. I have two questions I'd like to ask about 12-month island-wide traffic safety and enforcement, including enforcement of expired registrations and inspections. Some of you are aware that I have spoken about this more than once in recent years. So I'd like to offer some previous details that are in fact on the record. Not necessarily in town hall, but me with talking with other town officials. Just to set the background, it won't take too long. So on June 19th, 2021, I met with the newly hired, now former Chief Moynihan to discuss, Police Chief Moynihan to discuss this topic and his awareness of the issues I had been attempting to raise. On August 4th, same year, 2021, I met a second time with Chief Moynihan to discuss this topic a second time and the staffing and budget requirements pertinent thereto. Simply put, he understood and was concerned about the topic, but did not have the funding to even begin to staff such an effort. On September 17th, 2021, I met with Mary Ann, the town manager, to discuss my concern and the chief's response. Moving forward to January 2022, it's noteworthy that Chief Moynihan's exhaustive 2021 year-end review and 2022 look forward, as he titled his presentation. That presentation was presented to the council on January 19th, 2022, and he made the case for significant additional funding for police staffing in fiscal year 2023, which is the budget year that is now wrapping up. Additionally, Chief Moynihan made specific verbal reference to, quote, proactive policing like speed enforcement, unquote. And I'm quoting directly now from the YouTube video of the council meeting, January 19th, 2022, at approximately 2 hours and 23 minutes into the video. The video also shows that the Chief's Look Forward 2022 was well received by the council. Nobody had anything negative to say. Subsequently, Chief Moynihan requested a significant increase of more than $200,000 to the budget lines for police staffing for fiscal year 2023. The manager's budget recommended that same level as the chief had requested, and the council adopted that funding and financial town meeting approved it. And then Chief Moynihan resigned. To segue differently, To say that the summer of 2022 presented challenges that were unexpected is a gross understatement. The entire police leadership and staff performed admirably in response. For obvious reasons, former Chief Moynihan's program for, again, quote, proactive policing like speed enforcement, unquote, and other things in his program never really got started. And some of those have been briefly touched on tonight, specifically, I presuming the body cams. So my question is, my two questions are the following. And I'm going to change what I had written a little bit because as I was thinking more about what I just wrote 2 hours ago, I realized that it's presumptuous to think that anybody has an answer to these questions now, because they're really policy questions. So I'm going to ask them rhetorically and allow you to take it under advisement, and you can get back to me, figuratively speaking. Is the council still supportive of the vision that was crafted in the Look Forward 2022, including 12-month island-wide traffic safety and enforcement? And has the council, or will the council, ask the manager to take steps in this direction with our new police chief fiscal year 20, not to take effect necessarily in fiscal year 2023, but have a plan in place that is going, that he and she and you are willing to execute. Now, I know the town has had there's been dispute on the dais about whether the town should be directing people how to do their jobs. And I'm suggesting that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking for policy statements that provide direction to the community and to the town manager and her staff. Lastly, I will say that the fiscal year 24 requested and recommended police staffing budget lines. I'm only talking those 2 lines in the budget for police staffing. Increased a modest $17,000 on top of last year's significant increase. So the money should be available. This is a question of, do we have the will to do this in that manner or some other manner that the new chief, and I apologize for not addressing you by name, but I don't remember it now that someone else mentioned it, Chief Lynch. He comes with a strong record, and there's no reason to think that his plan wouldn't be as appropriate as another chief's plan. But we just need to move forward on something. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I don't think those are unanswerable. I think, at least from my perspective, you know, I know you and I have talked about this for 2 years now, and I remain committed to the principle. That's actually what I wrote, and I'm assuming I speak for others. It's I remember when we first started having these conversations, David, you had been you had a health issue and had started to walk a lot on the west side. And one of the things I remember that was notable for you is how much of a problem speeding and traffic were on that part of the island. And I still see it today.
And might I say that last summer, Mike Shea told me that when he had DOT out last summer or sometime in the recent months, that he and Marianne took them on their tour, and Mike made it every attempt to drive through every pothole around the island on the roads that you were on, so that they would really get the understanding, because it's not just the west side problem. It's a right. And you know, the practical reality is, we all know that once the reality is, we all understand that once the roads get paved, it'll get worse. So
That's right. You know, Marianne,
thank you.
that led to getting $20 million. So maybe you should take Chief Clark on a drive around. Maybe we'll get 20 million for oh, sorry, Chief Lynch. I don't know. Where did that come from? Sorry. I don't know where that came from. But, you know, maybe we'll find some money.
I think, David, you were directing that at me and I will address it. I absolutely believe that it is up to the police chief and the manager to put in place what goes on. He said he's supported in principle, as do I, but I am not going to I do not think we should be handing someone else's playbook and saying, this is what you have to do. This is a great guide. It's a great piece of information to have. But
I'm
you're
not
gonna- you're
suggesting
not
that. In
gonna
fact,
do-
I addressed that in my comment.
I know,
And,
but
you know, it's been 2
I just make it
years.
very clear.
It's been 2 years and it's been a whole year and we lost a whole year on the
we
program.
did,
And we've only recently had a chief hired.
right.
So, and I've also read in the newspaper reporting with respect to the police commission meeting where Chief Lynch is correct? Thank you. Made specific mention of some of these automated solar driven machines that will tell people how fast they're going. So, you know, he doesn't need any help from me or the council designing an approach. What he needs is to know that this is a priority in the community. From that can only comes from the council, and that's policy. So you and I can debate it later on if you want. And
No.
I wasn't referring to you specifically because somebody else
But
on the
I've been the
dais
most vocal about that.
had made mention of it previously. So
I feel very strongly that people on the council shouldn't be going to the police chief and saying, I want cars stopped on this corner. We all know that's happened and I think it's,
and you know that
deplorable.
I'm not doing that at this point. And in fact, with all due respect, one of the things I've learned about coming to council meetings as regularly as I do is that if one needs to make an impact, you have to know enough about your topic so that you can talk intelligently about it and perhaps add some credibility to the words that are coming out of your mouth. That's why I wrote my statistics down tonight, even to calculating the budget details, because I need to prove to myself that I know enough about the topic to speak rationally to you. Thank you.
So before you go, only because I will comment for a second about the speedometers on LED that were in Wilton. A number of people that worked with me in Norwalk would drive through Wilton, and there were two places those speedometer or those speed markers were placed. And when they got to work, the biggest question is, who got the higher number? So they don't always lead to what you think they will lead to. There's sometimes unintended consequences.
I'm not, I was only making reference to the fact that Chief Lynch had made mention of those types of tools. I wasn't offering an endorsement, and I'm offering an idea, the sense that it doesn't work.
I
So
was actually looking at Chief Lynch because he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
I think we beat this topic up for tonight.
No, it was very helpful and always helpful to remind ourselves that that's important. Hi, Kristen. How are you?
I'm
It's so good to see you.
I'd like to respectfully revisit the medical center ask. As a very seasoned person in this room, because the prior director of the library would not come. So I've been coming for a very long time. I mean, she did her years, but once I showed up, she was, you're going. So what does that impact look like? Does that put us over the cap? Where are we at? Is this an easy decision? Right? This is, again, your budget, right? This is what we present, and we ask questions tonight and try to get where everybody is safe and comfortable. And so I don't know what that answer is, but Amy does, or she can find us.
Sure, and we jumped right into the public hearing and didn't provide any sort of landscape setting,
Yeah,
which didn't give
my
us
fault.
a chance to make sure everyone knew that we are at the cap. This budget does call for the full 4% levy that is permissible, which means those kinds of choices are very challenging and it has to come with some trade-offs or new ideas from within or from outside.
But I will say, because I think Keith has already given his opinion, I think there's at least one other council member who's with your concern, that's me. And I think we need to, over the next couple of meetings, really figure out how do we make sure, what I heard was two very important things. One is how do we make sure we have the ability to replace a generator if it goes down, quote unquote, quickly? And the other is how do we fund a new generator or when, or, how do we do that? So there were sort of two elements that I heard. It's not going away. Won't be solved tonight probably, but it's not going away.
Again, I'm working from the medical center. I just wanted to give some guidance to my board. On the paper out here in the memorandum, on the fourth paragraph, it has at least intimation that there is some allocation for renovation of the medical center, but then I look at the capital budget, they're all zeros. So what was the thought behind what that would be?
Where are you, Tom?
Middle of the fourth paragraph, the school's HVAC renovation project and the renovation of the medical center.
I have in here, this coming year, we'll see construction of the Thomas property, affordable housing property, Paul O'Brien, the H school, HVC, and the renovation project. Is also expectation that that will begin of their road work. All these will require, projects will require staff involvement at different levels. So that means I see Tom involved with a lot of these projects.
Okay, but no.
I see myself
Okay.
involved with.
I think
a
you
lot
could
of these
imply that there's some sort of support, financial support. I just want to make sure that the board understands that that's not represented in the budget numbers, but more of a sentiment.
No,
in
that's why it
kind.
says all these projects will require staff involvement at different levels. I'm talking about town staff.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Sorry, Amy, I didn't give you we didn't have that opening 2 minutes. I apologize.
We got excited about the library award.
Sandra, Kim, call of you by name. Anybody else?
Can I ask a question, not quite budget related, but structural, the new human services position? What is that, what department is that in?
It would eventually be in their own department. You see that being their own department, like a recreation department. and
Okay.
the Finance department.
So, would seniors fall under that department?
I see that eventually happen, yes.
So eventually, like not this year, but
Well, this year, we're probably in a transition. We're looking to hire a new senior coordinator, so that's probably when we may begin that transition, yeah.
thank you.
Going once, we'll have another one. Jess? Come on.
Yeah, camera too.
Two separate hats. School committee. Love, obviously, the idea about the Fisher's Island. No problem with I would love to, I'd have no problem getting meetings online. I think this is a great idea. We need help as far as clerk, though. We don't even have one right now.
Right, that's a
Because
good point.
Our clerk has left, but we need somebody who can actually run the equipment. We see what a challenge it is, how long it takes to understand how to do it. You have to have a YouTube channel, you have, all that stuff. So there's a lot
Sure.
more that goes into
Yeah.
it, but there's no reason that we can't do it. Something else in the school? Oh, the generator thing at the school was a disaster. It's still a disaster. We're still having to pay a bill of somebody who came out to try to fix it and it didn't get fixed and we still have to pay the bill. So it's a disaster. So if you can get ahead of that at any time for the medical center, I think that's a great idea. Tourism. Oh, school.
Question.
Yep.
While you're there, and I'm sure there's an immediate reason. is there a reason why school committee meetings couldn't be held here? Only because the video, video and audio. That's why I'm asking.
I don't, but you'd still need somebody to run your,
Oh, no, I know. At least then your
yeah.
one leg is up. So I was,
As far as I know, there's not.
Okay.
As far as I know, there's not a reason that it's not held here.
okay, thank
I-
you.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just,
Sure. Tourism, the only thing I wanted to say about that is, when you talked about the meetings, same sort of situation applies there. I think with like zoning and those meetings, you guys have your town clerks that you pay, to do that, to be clerks for that. We don't have staff for that. So putting it online we're not really a town department per se. There's a question whether we fall into the charter. I'm not 100% sure. Again, I'm not averse to it. I just would need a lot of help from the town.
That's a
to-
really
to
good point.
implement
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
But if we do have our meetings here, but we
I'm-
can't use the town's YouTube channel because we're not technically a town. It's confusing.
I'm with you. I hadn't even really thought of the tourism council as being, I mean, I'm all for putting pretty much anything that people can see and read, but I hadn't thought of the tourism council.
When it comes to the rest of the budget, good luck.
So could I ask another question about,
Yeah.
well, of Sandra with senior advisory? So senior advisory asked for 59,400 and the recommended is 40,000. So what sorts of things is senior advisory looking for that won't be moving forward with that difference?
Sandra Kelly, Senior Advisory, Mohegan Trail. Basically, we would probably lose two of our fitness programs, our educational programs, home safety program, professional development, and most of our administrative
Hey,
expenses.
Sandra, would you move the microphone down
sorry.
closer to your
I'll
mouth? Thank you.
repeat that then. All right, basically, we would lose two of our fitness programs, most of our educational programs, the home safety equipment program, professional development, which we really haven't done in a couple of years because of COVID. And we did have a home companion training session, sessions that we were planning, we would be unable to do that.
and while you're up, that was why I sort of mentioned that 20,000 going into that line item. So then the director could direct it to those programs or whatever. So that was earlier when I mentioned line 8,300, that was the thinking, just tying it
Yeah,
together.
well, what I may say is maybe the director will take some of these responsibilities and programs. I have no idea how this position is going to, work out. But basically, I went over it and we would lose, half of what we want to do. We would like to keep certainly our coordinator. And hopefully we can hire a staff position to run the senior center, Connection Cafe, and some of the expenses and our senior ride service. I did have a question about and I know the vans are not coming for a couple of years, but I want to know who's going to drive the vans. If a senior needs a ride, are we going to depend upon volunteers?
We'll wait until we get to that point. At this point, I'm not prepared for something. It could be, with
Okay.
the human service director, we'll decide what staffing we may need or don't need and stuff like that going forward. I think
Okay.
it's premature to start talking about drivers.
Okay, thank you.
But that was one of the reasons on the size of the vans,
Correct.
to not have to have the special license.
That's correct. The reason the size of the van so that you do not need a special license.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. Anybody else? No? So what's your pleasure? Do you want to start going through the capital budget? Would that be okay with you?
Are we keeping this open? And is it open to the next meeting or do we close this one and open another one? That's a process question.
I think we'll just it was on the agenda and we'll close it when we adjourn and we'll reopen.
Yeah,
it when we do it. Yeah.
Cool.
Good question.
So we're the last two pages of the budget, which would be page 1 of capital, right? It just has a page 1 on the bottom.
What are we talking about? The
Yes,
capital
the
improvement
capital
plan?
improvement
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll give my usual speech and then Amy would go through this capital plan. As always, I say capital plan is just that, it's a plan, subject to change as we go through the years. And as we go through the years, some of the numbers get solidified a little better. So we have a better idea of what they are as we get closer. As I've always said, this is nothing more than a planning document to give us a roadmap as to where we would be going as it relates to our major construction and improvement projects. As you can see by this capital plan that's before you, the upcoming years, we have a lot of potential expenditures and things that need to get done. And I'm confident that as we go through the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be able to accomplish a lot of these things, especially if you look back at where we started 3 or 4 years ago and where we are now. We've done a great job. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Amy.
Can I ask a general question, Amy, if you don't mind? If you look all the way down to page 4 of the capital improvement plan, you have this possible funding breakdown. Capital budget funded tax, that's 385. Capital budget funded infrastructure fund 0, bond finance. So the anticipation would be if we fully implemented what's listed on here now, we would issue a $1 million bond after the financial town meeting.
We would seek authorization at the financial.
At
town
the
meeting.
financial town meeting to
When we
issue
would
a
issue
bond
this.
for $1 million.
Yes.
And what's that? Go ahead, Martha.
What do we have that is not issued?
What do we have that's authorized and not issued?
We have the school at 10-4, and we have broadband in a ban that's not permanent at 8. Yeah.
So, so one could theoretically put into this capital budget, say, for example, a generator. That would be an appropriate capital cost. Okay. The sidetrack, I just wanted to see that number.
No,
Ask you
that's okay. And what we try to,
I'll follow up on that for a second. But right now, all the numbers in here, and again, on page 4, the 2024 column, do add up to the 1.385. That's actually a question. Do they add up to the 1.385?
everything in the 2024 column adds up to 1385.
Right,
yes.
so if we were to put it, I'm just making sure I get it. So if we were to put a generator in, something else has got to come out to stay at that $1 million?
When,
No, that's why I'm,
So what I was asking is, we might decide that we want this number to be $1 million plus a generator.
yep. So then that number would be at 155. Yeah, whatever that number is. Yeah, okay.
let me say
Yeah.
what I think is the same thing differently to see if it hits differently. The entirety of 2024 that is funded through tax needs to carry over to the capital and operating budget in a way that maintains the balance of that budget. Okay. So you could add, yes, as long as you understand and I understand, although I think we're using different words, which is fine.
Probably wouldn't be this year, this coming year anyway.
That becomes a topic of discussion as well. What's the appropriate timing of that project or any other?
And how we fund it.
Let's take some money from Old Compton.
Starting on page 1.
We're not quite starting at page 1 yet.
Good.
Because I want to give a little bit more background, and the generator is the unfortunate exception to this, which is in general, we have tried to capture all of the requests that people have made. It's not always in the year that they have asked for them, but this way on the page, we've tried to get everything on there. When the generator, which was a last minute adjustment, came out, it didn't shift, it just came out. So, but I believe that's one of the few exceptions of something being asked for that you're not otherwise seeing at all. So there's a lot on the page. I think top to bottom is probably the best way to go. But if somebody wants to veer left or right, let me know. I think we've talked enough at the moment about the generator.
Well, I guess I have a question, and I know we're upcoming to discussions on DPW and all that, but I'm intrigued with having two buildings, and I'm still in the health services area, of two buildings and zero capital for a long period of time. And so that, to me, goes back to the conversation about half an hour ago of do you understand my conundrum?
I do. We don't,
And it's,
we
it
don't.
could
love
be
to
any
see-
line item.
We don't love to see any line item with zeros across. The reason we show it on the page is so that that conversation doesn't disappear.
Right.
And that we do a better job in the subsequent year of making sure we understand what the needs of that facility are. So.
Okay.
There's a little bit of, we're building these from requests of the department. We try to feed back. Did you think of this? Did you think of that? It looks like there's a gap here that needs to be talked about. But sometimes those gaps don't get filled right away.
Yeah, I got a question. And again, as this is, because I just don't know. The school and the medical center both have to have generators, is that right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The school and the school and the medical center have to have separate generators.
Tom, can you address that? I think we talked extensively in North about that, and he's better to answer that.
Yes.
And is there any way downstream that one could be a backup to the other? Or do they all have to be standalone at all times?
I wouldn't want to get away from having separate generators for each facilities, but if you could cross connect in case one went down, that would certainly be feasible. You could do it now by running cable on the ground. We could hardwire it too, as a backup. Neither the school nor the medical center can run without a generator.
Right.
So.
And I was talking about cross connecting only for, short-term emergency.
Right. You might want to upsize both as you replace them. So you could run the primary facility and the secondary facility, but not to the point where you're doubling.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I also briefly touched on what we think is one of the reasons why the school generator failed so quickly, or
Sure.
life was short. I think one of the things we've realized is put them inside a building and not inside a building.
Yeah, I lost Charlie, but the medical center generator is at least 30 years old. And the reason it's doing so well, it passes every test with flying colors because it's indoors. It never sees the weather. And the intake louvers close and open when the generator starts and stops. And it's going to live forever. There's no reason. It is numerically, 30 years is a nice life for that generator. In comparison, the school generator is only 15 years old, has no enclosure other than the sheet metal that it came with, and the top of the tank that it sits on is about to cave in. And that's been noted in the last 5 or 6 years that the tank top is at end of life in only 15 years. So the difference is very clear, and why. I did mention to Charlie when we were looking at the preliminary plans that the new generator at the health center was not going to be inside a building. And he said that the engineers are ordering a special kind of enclosure that lasts better in the marine environment. Okay. I would like to see it inside. It's the only other one we have. The medical center generator is the only one we have inside. But it's lasted the longest, so
Right.
it speaks for itself.
That's interesting.
Did I answer your question, Martha? It's possible, but we can't do it now. And I do want to clarify now that you gave me the mic, is the generator at the school powers the fire sprinkler pumps. There's not enough pressure from the water company because it's almost on the same height above sea level, that there's no pressure. And the pumps have to boost the pressure. Should there a valve open, the system sees the water flow, it starts the fire pumps and the generator if there is none. Statistically, our power outages are down to almost nothing. And we need to redress the generators we get based on a real municipality versus the old style where we had a power outage every week. Now, having said that, it's going to be out for 2 hours on Sunday, but that's intentional. So,
School's closed.
yes, but I will also say that you all remember that the school is a shelter, which is why
Yes.
FEMA donated that huge Kohler generator. It's half again bigger than we need and half again bigger than we're replacing. But it's what I think Kohler had, what FEMA had
Right.
at the time.
Right.
And they did loan us one that was big enough just to run the fire pumps, but it wouldn't do the central heating and all that.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was helpful.
Coast Guard Station?
Please.
So let's do the renovations to the motor pool first. Marianne alluded to those when we talked about the 24 budget.
Can I just ask, can you explain which building is the motor pool? Is that where the state police live?
Yes.
Okay,
It's one with the
Yes.
garages underneath it. On the
okay,
left-hand side. as you go
great,
down.
thank you.
Sure. And then the top line there is the station house. And this is really, I would, a best guess bare bones accommodation for what needs to be done there.
For its
Um,
current use.
For its current use. It does not contemplate a program change, which is that sort of placeholder line that we have funded in out years in other versions of the capital plan,
Mm-hmm.
but isn't currently contemplated. So again, it's still a little bit in flux about what an ultimate program there would be. But much like we talk about the North Light, the station house itself, even in its current use, is going to need funds just to maintain that functionality.
And it's
So-
also,
Oh, sorry.
I was just throwing in my usual, it's also reached historic status.
So the station house is the building with the tower on it?
The station house is the building with the tower. Also on the property is the boathouse. And so the Harbors Department uses that as one of their facilities, the boathouse. And then you'll have the chief's house, which is the brick house at the end, also called the Sardette. You'll see a line there, which had been, again, founded in some out years for construction of a rental residence there. You'll recall that we did a lot of those renovations over the last 2 fiscal years. And so most of the work that remains will either be budgeted in future years or the smaller projects accommodated through facilities maintenance.
And just as a reference, Amy, if I remember right, on the station house, motor pool, boathouse, et cetera, annual maintenance, painting, repairs, I mean, it's a lot of money. That's not around capital. I remember previous discussions, it was sort of that between 75 and 100, if I remember. right.
Yeah, we did that
Just-
exercise several years ago. Yep.
I'm just making, I mean, just to even keep this with the Band-Aids on, it's
If you were.
a lot of money.
If you were to fully fund the annual maintenance, including upkeep to a higher standard, it would run about 75 to 100,000. Right now, that line item is about 25,000.
I'm just really glad we finally got control of the chief's house.
Yeah.
Other comments around the Coast Guard station or move down to library?
Go ahead.
So as we discussed in the 24, 23 and 24, we're continuing an HVAC replacement program there. When we put those current year requests alongside prior requests that had to do with general building maintenance, that crosses that capital threshold, it essentially showed up as $30,000 a year for whatever the project necessary in that year is. So for 23 and 24, that's HVAC. For 25, I think that's some reconfiguration, and you start to get to just all the things that you need to do to maintain a building that is heavily used.
And this drops off if they're only a finalist and not a winner.
I think in either case, we probably have to keep the standard. We could probably take the roof line off of there now. It's something we were watching for quite some time.
Sure.
We do always keep the elevator as a potential failure point. Everything seems to be steady, in fact, better than steady. But better than it's been in prior years. How about that? But it is an expensive item if it were to show signs of being temperamental.
But you have a new contractor who you like, right? Yeah.
I'm happy to give my elevator speech.
Remember, they're only 30 seconds.
The consistent power, the switch to the consistent power was huge for the elevator.
Yeah.
The building settling was huge for the elevator. We have maintained it much better with constant, that's an oil and lube job, very basic maintenance. And yes, we have a new company, so we're confident that they'll come more often. We vacuum the track so the door doesn't get stuck. We leave it on the lower level so that, we've learned lots of things about an elevator living with one. And, it's always scary to talk about the elevator without being able to knock wood, but so far so good.
So if there are no other comments, we can move down to the police station. Again, dispatcher renovations, I think we discussed it in this
Sure.
group
Yep.
within the last few weeks, the need there, but also an acknowledgement that the need there is going to be slightly shaped by the timing of a public
exactly.
safety complex. So right now slated for across 2 years, 25 and 26, to do some dispatch and lower level renovations there.
When we discussed this the other day, and my concern gets back to my conversations with previous two chiefs, I've not talked to Chief Lynch about it, but as long as he's comfortable, I mean, in essence, with the current structure of, when you walk in, dispatches to your right and police to your left, and, if there are ways, spending a little bit of money now to make it safe, or, I just wonder whether some of that 100 shouldn't shift to this coming year, just to enable safety. And that's a comment of making sure that we're doing our best to keep people safe.
Yeah. John and I are working, or Chief Lynch and I are working together daily on what needs to be done. We've just put all new locks in that vestibule to keep the fire department from just wandering into dispatch and some other things. So that's all ongoing, and lighting and some electrical work is going on right now. So I have a constant flow of work in those buildings that is under the maintenance budget and not capital. So things are going on, especially in that area.
Thank you.
Down to beaches, town beach facilities. Again, that's starting to be more of an annual program. The new beach house is now not quite as new, so it's time to be proactively planning for the things that need to be replaced.
Desperately needs painting.
And painting of that facility has been an operating cost and I
Oh.
expect will continue to be. However, it's accomplished.
This painting has been done by Dave Sniffen and staff. And they've done a good job keeping it up.
I'm not complaining
No,
about them.
but no-
I literally just happened to walk by and said, boy, that needs paint.
But with that said, we would like to,
Not by Home Depot
we would like to
Have a
Have-
painter.
have a painter.
Yes, I understand.
Dave and the staff does a wonderful job, however,
Yes.
they are not professional painters.
Yes.
So what we're contemplating here are things like hot water heater replacements. Then you'll get to decking replacements when you get to 27. And then probably some more significant plumbing replacements out in 29.
Sure.
Sorry to bring it up, but it's on here. Can somebody, or Tom, can you give us this update on the bathrooms at Mansion Beach? It's on here. I mean, it's
I don't
it's
think we
on
have
the
enough
list.
time.
No, Tom will be quick. I know that.
So the concrete restrooms for Mansion Beach are in the permitting process right now. They are probably 98% constructed in Portland, Oregon. And we're working now on how to get them here once we have all the permits. We got a favorable review last night from, thank you, Conservation. And planning is the 12th and zoning is the 26th. So by the end of the month, we should be in business and they ought to be arriving right about then.
With the plan of operational for the summer. That's,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's,
If all the permitting goes forward as we predict, yes.
thank you. And thank you for all the work to get it through permitting.
Right, you still have one more.
North Light, I think we heard feedback from the group during the 24 discussion. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything or move ahead to Thomas property. As we discussed, this is showing up as a bonding item, so this would be a warrant question. I think the number is still being finalized. I don't know, Marianne or Tom, if you want to.
Yeah, that's correct. Number is still being finalized at this point.
That was the only question I had was.
And
is-
we'll have it finalized in anticipation of the warrant being presented.
Great, perfect. Can I just ask, just sort of go back and Tom, I don't, if you don't have the answer to this, sort of waving magic, waving a magic wand, what does the North Light need? Is it this, what would this be? 302 or is it like,
To be what?
yeah, to be done and
Define-
to
can you-
be,
Define done? Do we want to live in quarters on the second floor? Do we want windows? On
Yes.
the second floor?
why not? It's free to talk about.
Sure. 3 million.
3 million? Okay.
The tower is cracked.
Yep.
That's the first stress. I'm cracking under stress. The steel, it's
You
one
can't put
steel
the tower
plate.
indoors.
One steel plate in the roof is cracked, according to Robbie. I'm not an expert on that. It's a roof plate, not the tower itself. A roof of the tower, but the tower structure is fine. But it's already rusting through and the wood trim is showing wood through the paint now, so we've neglected it. I think it had to do, I welcome you to talk to Robbie. It had to do with a repair that was made during the tower installation that has now failed. So it's the absolute highest priority in that project right now.
Sure. Yeah, I just figure it is free to sort of think about and talk about.
There's no windows on the second floor. It's plywooded over. Yes. Yeah, they have an arch top. Those would be custom wood windows. Because that's how you get custom windows. I mean, it would be prohibitively expensive to get aluminum clad or clad windows with those historic shapes. I'm with you. I would go with clad all day or even fiberglass, but that's.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the reasons, just to finish this out, is that Robbie was trying to do it, as you said, with local resources. We're now having AppCore, who did the Southeast Light, look at estimating all that.
I'm sorry, I meant the folks who handle and give out the money.
Oh, yes.
I
So-
actually think it would be worthwhile to talk to Elizabeth, just because she does so much of these buildings professionally, those are the malls. Just because my bet is she has a sense of where there are pots of money for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, the
She's-
the
she's
National
new-
Lighthouse Preservation Society, or
She's new on HDC, but she's a consultant who does stuff like, major projects in Central Park, I mean, like she is, and she may be aware of pots of money for that kind of stuff. And she's here all the time and cares about this stuff.
So right now, we just have Robbie. Is there a commission? A North Lake Commission? I don't know. Is there a North Lake Commission? Sorry.
So what we've decided to do administratively as an administrative team here, I think it's a lot to ask Robbie and the commission to be involved in the maintenance and the long-term upkeep and what needs to be done. In recent months, Tom has taken a very active role in that North Light. And I think in the coming years, as easy as 6 to 9 months, we will start to have a better idea of really what needs to be done there. And also as a side, I am interviewing with Allison, grant writer candidates on Friday. So.
He's gotten so much money in the past, it's discouraging.
Community planning? So, two items that are both slated right now for 2026. One is a requirement, which is the comp plan update. As I look at that number, it probably might need some robustness to it, but we'll look at that, I guess. And then the second is an Old Harbor Vision Plan. Marion, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to the timing of that, or?
No, not at this point.
Can you remind me? Because I can remember we went through at least 2 meetings on what we ended up doing with the New Harbor Vision Plan.
So what we
Do
ended
you
up,
remember? I
yes,
probably remember.
I do remember.
I know, but I can't remember what the heck we.
So
ended
what
up
we
doing.
decided, we had $80,000 for a new Harvard study. At
Yes.
that point, we had extensive conversation and decided, the council decided to reallocate a good portion of those funds for other items. And it left, I think, 15 or 25,000 to do a traffic study, which has been completed. It's in draft form. I've done one look at it. Allison's done one look at it. So we need to probably finalize our one look at it so we can bring it to the council.
Other questions on page 1?
Not for me, thank you.
So page 2 starts with fire and rescue. And this is a representation of their submittal, which was very thorough in terms of what they were looking for across the years. Right now, the public safety complex slated in the 2025 budget. The council's had a lot of conversation around that.
Mhm.
Questions, comments?
No, not for me. I would just say, Marianne, thank you for keeping on that communications thing that we worked on last year. Thank you.
You got a ways to go, but you're welcome.
Yeah, I know, it's, I was actually wondering whether broadband would help you know, whether there's some ability to connect and extend radio range by use of, you know, occasional Wi-Fi hotspots. I
Yes.
in that sentence, I exceeded my technical understanding of this.
What you need to do is come in my office and look at this. Tom has drawn it all up on a whiteboard for me.
Oh,
so it's in my
fabulous.
office.
In terms of vehicles, this is not all of the vehicles. Some of them, particularly police, we've moved into the operating budget because they're on a regular
Right,
replacement
right.
cycle. These are more one-off. So for highways, in 2028, that number right there is slated for replacement of the sweeper. Obviously, not something that happens frequently. Recreation vans, we've talked a fair amount about. And then the 45 slotted for 2025 is replacement of an ATV, which has a couple of different interdepartmental uses
I see.
associated with it.
The blue potential employee housing initiative that ties down into highway garage department, what, is that just looking for that for all these?
Sure, if you can see it best on, well, it crosses pages now at this point, but page 1 also picks up a lot of those in
Mhm.
terms of housing.
So it's just anywhere there's housing, that's just sort of.
Thank you
Yeah,
for keeping that flagged.
we had done that a
Yeah.
couple years ago, as housing presses for employees was really
Yep.
an urgent topic. Harbors. A number of different items here. Broken down into Old Harbor, which are really expansions of uses in a lot of cases. So we're talking about opportunities to change uses in the West Dock, and then addition of an Old Harbor bulkhead, which we've talked about for a few years now in terms of diversifying the town's access to materials, bringing in some of its own things, and particularly in more emergency situations, having an alternative.
Sure. Can I'm sorry to back up on vehicles. I'm curious, and you know, maybe this is Mary Ann, maybe this is something we can't answer tonight, but one of the things that struck me is how challenging it was, you know, even to get a Ford F-250 pickup truck, you know, so I just wonder when I see, you know, we're going to have needs over the next few years, whether it makes sense. I don't know how the deposits work, but whether it makes sense to, you know, given supply chain issues, if they still exist, to sort of order those vehicles a year out. I'm sure someone is on top of that. It just happened to occur to me.
But in light of what's happening, that's something that I think we really need to start exploring, especially you've seen the same thing with these vans.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
simple van, 12 to 14 months out.
Yeah.
It's just the truck being canceled, another one ordered. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And we've actually done that with that sweeper.
You
It's
just put a deposit
it's
down and said, we're going to
slotted
need it
for-
in 26.
slotted for the difference between ordering and delivery.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it makes,
Obviously, as we get closer, it may have a couple extra years in it.
Sure.
but-
yeah. Thank you. Sorry to digress there.
Sure. One of the others I'd call your attention to is the renovation of the Old Harbor Visitor Center, right now under 2026 at 500,000. Again, that number was a placeholder from a couple years ago. Not going to be sufficient at this point, but it's much more about talking about the vision of what
Yes.
people may want there and sort of getting ready for the execution of that project.
Right.
That's a great conversation when, you know, after whenever the announcement's going to be or whatever we're going to be doing, to start that, rekindle that conversation with Renowski's.
Moving over to New Harbor. Again, construction of the harbor's facility and all the associated items with that is essentially a placeholder with latitude to slide that as appropriate. Replacement of the Coast Guard Station dock, again, not a full replacement, but making that functional on an ongoing basis, we talked about. New Harbor Interchannel dredging. We saw that in the operating budget. The
Right.
reason it's in your capital plan, you're making that
Yeah.
face going, what? Because there's also room in the capital process for new programs. And so the capital process is about dollar thresholds, the 25,000.
I see.
But it's also about new policies where the town may want to weigh in from a planning perspective.
Yep.
So dredging an area that hasn't been dredged can fall into that category. This is in, right in front of the boat ramp for the channel. It feels pretty obvious as a need. But again, under the capital planning process, it does have,
Both there every day.
it does have
Couldn't get through half the time.
a place in the capital plan, so. So that's why that is there. We talked about the next two items, replacement of the harbor's truck. Again, that's over 10 years old at this point, so it lives in the capital. Replacement of a trailer is over on the operating side.
I see.
We replace
Gotcha.
those much more
Yep.
regularly,
Mhm.
doesn't require a special budget.
Sure.
The next item, oil spill containment boom, is in the current year budget as well. And then it needs to be replaced, yes. That's sort of a can't be put off and deferred item.
Is this where we should give a shout out to Kate and Mary Ann and the entire town staff for getting that boat off the beach today?
That's all Kate. I cannot take any, all I do is just kept encouraging her. That was all Kate. All Kate.
Yeah. Right off Mansion Beach.
Your house, it's in your yard. You'll see it when you go home.
White mast light from your bedroom.
Keep going, Amy, you're on a roll.
All right. So the final item on page 2, replacement of the Marine Patrol. Obviously, the cost of that vessel, particularly a replacement cost, is much, much higher. The goal would be to continue to evaluate opportunities for outside
Sure.
funding, have the match ready to go
Right.
when we can find
Yep.
somebody to pay for the rest.
Great.
On page 3, this is an area that in capital, out of capital is tough when you talk about IT. Most of it we've moved over to the operating budget. The police side of technology, because it's such a heavy lift, we're keeping on the capital side. It's big in terms of dollars, it's big in terms of effort, and it's big in terms of the things that can get implemented downstream.
Right.
So that's why that's over
Do
here.
you try to use as a rule of thumb for that, how long the equipment is likely to last?
Yes.
Is that an important thing?
Yep.
that you
So
calculate?
that's something that the town manager goes through with our IT
Right.
people in terms of the town's current assets.
Nothing
expected
in that
useful
world
life.
seems to last more than, 24 months.
And so over on the operating side, we're working off of a percentage of our
Yeah.
assets.
So that's a big improvement we've made in recent
Yes.
years because we were fortunate enough through the budget process to get significant money budgeted, $150,000 in technology. I think the year before last it was. And when Freedom Tech came on board, we took a look at everything. We had a lot of stuff that were out of life through no fault of anyone's. And now we have everything on a schedule, more of a 3-year schedule.
Even in this is the third one I've seen, I just think the improvements and the long-term vision associated with the capital plan and the budget it's really dramatic. And I say for me, and I know for others, I really appreciate it. I think it's, what's that?
Except for the microphone.
Except for the microphones, but I'll say it away from, I'll say congratulations.
Public safety, we talked a little bit about already. And The program that's outlined here is the remainder of the program that was presented last year. So it doesn't reflect those new initiatives or different ways of implementing the priorities that Chief Lynch is going to bring to the table. So I would expect some shifts when we review this next year. But like we said, we think there's enough funding from what we have in fiscal year 23 and held over from previously to do some of those things already.
Right.
So the vision is fire building in 25. I mean, I know we're going for federal funding and all that, and then the next year will be the police wing. Is that, I mean, I'm looking at,
That is how it is currently.
that's the way it's laid out on the columns at least.
I'll reiterate that this just carried forward the prior year program. We will expect it to change. First of all, I don't
Both in,
think
in dollar level and timing.
any of us could handle those back to back,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just,
So, yeah. But again, but the need is there.
Yeah.
Or
Oh,
maybe,
yeah.
or maybe depending on how it all comes together. Moving into highways, you start to have some of those different funding sources. So not everything that you're seeing is necessarily town funded. This is a great example, the highways garage facility at 5 million, that's DOT funded. You'll see that down on the bottom breakout.
Yeah. Right.
Paving of the aprons we carried forward, although we didn't have as much discussion about it in this year's capital program, but it's something we can continue to evaluate.
Hey, Mary Ann, I've got or Amy, either one of you, I've got a question. On the highway garage facility, is that going to be something that local people are going to be able to bid on? Or do you know?
I'm going to assume, and because there'll be federal funds and stuff like that, that would go out to bid and anyone can bid on something.
Right, because I know they've been closed out in the past for lots of technicalities. Which may be straightened out by now. I don't know.
Prevailing wage.
It does have to,
requirements
it will be a
and
prevailing
process.
wage.
I mean, there's-
But
in order to-
even if we were to bid out something, anything in a construction project
He's in-
in Rhode Island has to be prevailing wage where there's public funds. So I find it hard to believe it was prevailing wage. Maybe it's,
Well, it's not that they don't want to pay prevailing wage. It's that there's a whole bunch of compliance that comes along with it and sort of
certified
infrastructure
cash flow and
in
stuff
order
like
to
that.
be
Yeah.
in that kind of process. Oh, bonding, yeah. Did you do solid waste and sanitary sewer? Sorry.
Go ahead.
I actually had a question around water. And how, so I know there's the USDA, and by the way, we have a work session coming up with John I think to talk about some of this stuff, but I just was curious as I was going through this, how the bonding for that project works and the extent to which it, because so much of it is with the USDA low interest, et cetera, sort of to what extent that is on in sort of in quotes our balance sheet going forward.
So it's all on your balance sheet.
Yeah.
The town of New Shoreham, particularly when you're looking at borrowing, is going to encompass all of those entities. So in terms of the government-wide balance sheet, that debt is there. In terms of the town's borrowing capacity, which is set by state statute, we include sewer and water's debt when we calculate our capacity and our remaining capacity. And that statute says you can't borrow more than 3% of your assessed value.
Right.
Which for us puts a threshold or a cap at about $50 million in borrowing. We count sewer and water because historically we have issued under that section of the general law. It is not a requirement that we issue under that section of the general
Right.
law. And so as water is looking at a pretty sizable project, one of the things we are investigating is just some changes to that authority and whether we issue under a different statute.
Right.
Doesn't change the town's obligation,
No.
doesn't change sort of our backstop as the ultimate borrower, but it may create more flexibility
Right.
against some of those
Thank you.
caps. Is that clear?
It was very clear, yes.
Solid waste? So, Marianne, I don't know if you want to describe the sort of the grant related to the transfer station?
So what we had done was, we worked with what's called PRI, which is a nonprofit agency set up by the state of Rhode Island to help municipalities apply for grants and also find grants. So we submitted a bunch of stuff to them and we got focusing on specifically the transfer station. We've talked extensively about the need to renovate or reconstruct and also the operations and things of
flow.
that nature. And we know we need to.
Is that the same one you're applying to for the composter?
Yes,
Okay.
I think it's the same. Yes, it is
Yeah,
the same one of the same organizations doing it. So yes, it is.
Yeah.
So what we did was we presented to them, they took a look at what we wanted to do and they said, unfortunately, you're not shovel ready as it relates to the building and operation. And they're not, we're not shovel ready. We're far from that. We don't have a plan. So instead, we looked at large equipment that we could purchase that eventually we will be able to transition into a new facility. So that's what we've done. Those grants have been applied for. We have not heard as of yet. The deadlines for the application of those grants, I think, was either the end of December or mid-January. And I'm not sure when it will hear from that. But I'll ask, Allison may have a better handle on that, so I will be chatting with her on that.
Wonderful, thank you.
And so that sort of precedes, to some extent, although you don't wait for an answer, the rest of the considerations around the transfer station, which is why the planning component of that is in 25. Right. Instead of 24, which is, I think, where it had been.
I got it, but if one assumes that we're gonna get them or we will need them down the road, those capital elements that we're planning with the grants, why wouldn't we do the planning, which is the 200 or 150,000 in 24? I mean, I with the assumption we're gonna need them whether we have the grants or not. Now, maybe we have to delay some things, or I don't know. I'm really reacting to the fact that this continues to slide right. And it's, I don't know, I'm not anything near an engineer or anything. I look at the roof of that building. I think about what that building is. I look at the traffic flow. We talked enough about composting. I mean, it's so ripe for, I just don't want it to go right anymore. And really, I'd love to figure out how do we start planning around it seriously versus talking? And I guess my question is, with all dreams, could we slide both of them a column left and still make that, or would that screw up the grant timing?
I would just look at the grand total numbers, which I assume is part of the rationale for trying to figure out where you put that $2 million hit.
But the $5 million of DOT.
So as this document sort of, it's all notional, of course, but if we were to slide that left, we would go from 41 million to almost 44 million. Is it, am I understanding?
Well, yes, but the DOT number that's right above it, that 5 million is actually from the DOT itself.
No, I know. Yeah.
So if I can just throw in this one comment, I think in the next year to two, we have a substantial number of major projects.
Yes, that's.
And
From
the staff
handling projects.
capacity,
Got it.
and the island capacity, I think as much as we all would like to move some of this stuff, I think it's in the best interest to slide.
Do it right.
Much better said than.
Yes, so.
Page 4?
Yes.
Hi. You know, recreation was one of those, we need some stuff on the page. And the reality is that Dave and the recreation department have been tackling a lot of their things on an ongoing basis. So as I said, we laid out some plans for the beach house. There's work happening, or, on its way for Heinz Field, including the drainage and the parking issues. And so he really didn't have a lot on his long-term plan. We're going to keep asking, but
Do you know what he has in mind in terms of pickleball? Because I know that I don't play pickleball, but I know that there's
Don't,
no.
for all the talking you do about it.
Well, it's crazy how the thing has exploded, and I think Dave is also sort of like, it's like he can't put enough pickleball sessions in the
And-
January schedule.
And now it's conflicting with other recreational programs
Yeah.
because I think he made some or painted some lines at the Bull O'Brien Field with the basketball courts, and it conflicted with basketball. But with that said, keep in mind, there's two places where pickleball is now being discussed. One specifically with the Maritime Center. We talked about the pickleball event.
Yeah.
Also, Dawn, who works with Dave, is aggressively looking at a DEM grant, which will open up in September. And she's looking to put an application in for a pickleball court.
Yeah, I'm not complaining about anything.
Yeah.
It's just, I know that people have talked about the potential for pickleball at Ball O'Brien and.
So if we're not
pickleball
successful
at
with that grant, you may
Sven's
see
backyard, library.
and we talked a lot about whether it belonged on this page or not. And because of the excitement, there was a little bit of reluctance to be boxed into a year. And because there are so many opportunities that they think they can secure.
Right.
That we think we can tackle that in a different way.
But if we're not successful, you may see.
It
that
may
next
come
year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes, there's a lacrosse field.
Yeah. I don't remember.
It's over at the athletic center. Oh, sorry.
I didn't go up there.
Really, it wasn't your place of habit.
Marianne, I don't know if you want to comment on the school at all or.
So the school, as you know, it's the $10.4 million that is the HVAC. It's been authorized. We were supposed to get, and we'll update the council, but as a brief side, we're supposed to get schematic designs and estimates today. Was the date in the calendar. They've been delayed a couple of days. They've been under review, so we expect that information and numbers by Friday. So that project is moving along as anticipated.
And then most of the block in the transportation field is going to be DOT related. There is some consideration for whether there's any town work that can be done efficiently alongside that.
Yeah.
So that's slated in there at 2025.
Can I ask a question about that DOT process, Marianne? How do they work? Does a Mike Shea come up with, alongside his, his DOT counterparts or the DOT representative for Block Island or the regional director, whatever it is, and say, okay, we need to replace all the culverts on Mohegan Trail. And that gets spec'd out and sent out to bid. And it's a state project or is it a town project? How's that all gonna work?
So it's my understanding,
Yeah,
it's going to be a state project.
Yeah.
They're the subrecipient of the federal funds.
right.
How I see this working, and we've seen something preliminary with this, as we were chatting with the folks at RIDOT, we had a couple of Zoom meetings, and one specifically, we were talking about the salt shed. And they were proposing putting a salt shed separate from the facility, the highway facilities. Mike says, we have it currently in, it works. We can do this, we can do that, we can do this. This is why we think, he said, this is why we should be inside. They gave a little pushback. Finally, there was a gentleman who was on the Zoom call who finally said, I've known Mike Shea for X amount of years. He knows the Block Island business. If he said he wants a salt shed inside the building, we'll put the salt shed inside the building.
Right.
So I think
So it'll
what
be a
they'll do
cooperative.
is, they know no one's, especially in Block Island, because the state roads are maintained by Block
Yes.
Islanders, where other communities, that's not the
Yes.
case. They know the staff on Block Island is more familiar than they ever could imagine being with the road. So based on what I've seen initially, I think it's going to be a very collaborative situation. They're going to rely on us for on board of
Sure.
the information. As Mike said, the last time Rideout was out here was over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So they don't know the neighborhood.
I think that brings us to the end.
This is terrific. Got a lot to talk about. It's great. Got a lot to do. Jeepers creepers.
And just to make sure, Amy, from my math, because Keith a minute ago brought up the 41 million. 20 of that 41 is the RIDOT dollars.
Yes.
Just, I'm making sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Which even with that is twice the next highest year. So I'm not minimizing the fact that there's $20 million that the town's putting forward. So I'm not, that was not my intention.
It's such
It was
a
just making
bargain.
sure. Yeah, right.
As I said to the first warden earlier today, if I had $100 million, we can do a lot of projects on this island.
Yeah.
And just be on an even keel.
Yeah.
I mean, and what we will be getting done and stuff that we need.
And that's one of the reasons I was complimenting you on this ongoing refinement to the budget overall, but given that we're talking about capital to the capital, because it really does lay out over time. A lot of these are things that are not, wouldn't it be nice to have? You know what I mean? They're things we need to do. And it's important for people to know that. It's very helpful to have it laid out, I think. I appreciate it. Kristen.
Just for my own clarification, this came up, I've been going to Tourism Council because we're throwing a big event. Jackie Woodson is coming on June 3rd. There's my plug. And so we're looking for funding. And so there seems to be still question about who owns the visitor center. Do we rent the land there? What does that look like? And it sort of struck me last meeting with this with the council, the 10,000 in, 10,000 out. That's correct? 10,000 in, 10,000 out to the chamber. And no, yeah, I know. That's weird to me. Yeah.
Yes.
So 10,000 in, 10,000 out is very simple but accurate, but not to the chamber. So the town supports the visitor center to the tune of $10,000. The chamber pays the town rent for the space at the hospitality center for $10,000.
Okay, that's great. I'm not sure everybody gets that, and I know this is an ongoing dialogue, so it's
Yes.
always good to say it again out loud. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, just to continue, and we discussed it last time, don't go far, Amy. This is what Lars did 2-3 years ago, was setting up the Welcome Center as a separate entity so the ambassadors are paid to the Welcome Center. Maybe the director is the same for both or something like that, but,
Yeah.
and then the chambers over here.
Yeah.
And that was very intentional to make sure that there was sort of church and state.
Yeah.
So the support that the town council is really focused on is to the Welcome Center and those ambassadors who are greeting people.
Great.
Simplest way to say it.
Great. Thanks for the clarification. And then I wasn't quite following before, but the capital tax, when we're at possible funding breakdowns on page 4, capital budget funded tax, that is included in the operating budget. And then then bond finance is not in the operating budget. So Keith, that's what you were suggesting perhaps could be increased for a generator. Great. I didn't quite follow that before. I hadn't seen the numbers. Thank you.
Any further questions?
I guess just moving forward and I don't know the process and when we're planning to sort of reconcile. But to me, for the whole night and looking at capital, the one area that I really personally would like to revisit is this whole generator discussion and the medical center. And I just don't want that to sort of leave the table. I mean, everything else was sort of a little here, a little there and moving around, but that's the one piece that I think is not settled in my head at all. Just as a next step.
So I think that's the sort of leaving aside, I think that's a really, it raises a more general point, which is when are we going to have our conversation, you know, around push me, pull you, and I think I have it, I know I have them all on my calendar, but
So you have the next public hearing is on the 5th, which is a week from today.
right.
And then you have adoption, which is a final public hearing on the 17th. What I would suggest to the council on that 5th, stop that dialogue.
Yes, yeah.
So that the 17th at
Yeah.
adoption, that after the 17th comes. we're
Right,
done.
exactly, we're done. Yeah, I just
So-
wanted to,
And if you have any
Something helps
feedback
me
for Amy and I at this point that we can work on between now and April 5th, feel free.
yep. Yeah, thank you very much. I would entertain a motion to adjourn, second. All those in favor, aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Chief.